It's 1983, and John Elway was one of the highest rated rookies in the history of the draft. Just one problem, though. He didn't want to play for the team that had the first overall pick, the Baltimore Colts. After some back and forth between his agent Marvin Dimhoff and Colts GM Ernie Accorsi, the Colts were open to trading that number one pick, but the price was pretty high. Here's what they wanted: 3 first-round picks, 2 in 83, and 1 in the top 6, and 2 second-round picks. All for a kid from Southern California who had yet to play a single down in the NFL. So the night before the draft, the Oakland Raiders made a serious play for Elway and had a deal in place. Here's what they had: a trade with the Chicago Bears that would send a young prospect named Howie Long for the number 6 pick, and Baltimore would also get the 26th pick in the draft that the Raiders currently had. Elway himself said that he thought he would be a Raider, and as the story goes, the trade was a lock except for one guy, Pete Rozelle. Rozelle and Davis had been in each other's throats since the AFL-NFL merger, with Davis, who was the AFL commissioner and thought he would be the NFL commissioner. And then when the Raiders moved to LA without the consent of the owners, Davis took the NFL to court, which was where he was the night before the draft when the trade was supposedly set up. But the story is that the Bears got a phone call. No one has officially said it was Rozelle, but former Raiders personnel director Ron Wolf swears that it was Pete Rozelle. The Bears were told to back off the trade, and it fell through. But what would happen if Rozelle let that trade go through? Baltimore was going to use that pick to draft Dan Marino. Now, if you're thinking this is just the same career for Elway with a different uniform, I think you're wrong. But this trade would also have affected 2 legendary quarterbacks, Dan Marino and Peyton Manning. That's right, Peyton Manning. So let's take a look at the 3 biggest changes that would take place if John Elway had ended up playing for the Oakland Raiders. LA went nuts for the Raiders while they were there from 82 until 1994. And then Al Davis wanted the stadium that they promised him when they moved. Davis even tried to cut a deal with nearby Irwindale, California to get a new stadium. Now you insert Elway on that team, and there's more motivation for LA to want to keep the Raiders because Elway was a hometown kid. He played at nearby Granada Hills High School. He's also now put the Raiders in a position where they're competing for a Super Bowl every year. So in 1994, rather than play this big game of chicken with Al Davis and the Raiders, LA does whatever they can to get this thing done. The Raiders never go to Oakland. They stay in LA with Elway on the team. Dan Marino had a great career, but he walked into a Miami team that was already coming off a great run with Don Shula on the tail end of his career. And he had success early on. We went to a Super Bowl in 84, AFC championship game in 85, but they kind of tailed off, became an average team, never had a really good running game. They always had strong receivers. Now you take Marino and you stick him in an organization with the GM of Ernie Accorsi, who built the Cleveland Browns teams in the 80s that went to back-to-back AFC championship games, and you have a much different story. And then in 1987, Ron Meyer became the head coach of the Colts. Now, if you don't know who Ron Meyer was, you may know him more for being the coach of SMU when they had all those recruiting violations, but he was actually a really good NFL coach. This guy went to a Super Bowl in 1985 with Tony Eason as his quarterback and beat Dan Marino's Dolphins in the AFC Championship game. So, with Ernie Accorsi sticking around because he's got his quarterback of the future, they bring in Ron Meyer, you have a much different situation in Indianapolis. Now, Marino likely gets one of his rings. On the flip side, Elway walks into a Raiders team that is already built for success, and all he does is make them better. They still win the Super Bowl in 1984. I would think that Elway would get 3, 4, or even possibly 5 Super Bowls in his career. And while that's going on, it's the Raiders and it's the Dolphins. AFC Championship game most of the time, kind of like what we saw with the Patriots and the Colts. And that GOAT conversation becomes much different because now you've got Elway with 4 or 5 rings. Marino gets at least 1. So until Tom Brady comes in and wins his 6 Super Bowls, that's always going to be the debate between Elway and Marino. So obviously with Marino on the final run of his career, the Colts aren't going to have the number 1 pick in 1998 when Peyton Manning comes out, which means that Peyton Manning doesn't go to the Indianapolis Colts when he becomes a rookie. It's likely going to be San Diego. They would have had the top pick, followed by Arizona. Oakland would have not been at number 4. So then you have Chicago in play. So you still got Ryan Leaf there. Arizona had just drafted Jake Plummer. So it's going to be between San Diego and Chicago to see who gets Ryan Leaf or Peyton Manning. I think Peyton still goes number 1 to San Diego, but as his career goes forward, he still has the injuries. So now, when he's shopping for teams, John Elway isn't in Denver to mentor him. Maybe he's the VP of operations for the then LA Raiders. Peyton, in the original history, was picking between Denver and the Titans. So, in this alternate history, there's no Elway in Denver. Peyton Manning finished his career up in Nashville, Tennessee, the same state that his career started in. So there you have it. Had Pete Rozelle not stepped in and stopped that deal that would have given the Raiders that number 1 overall pick, it would have been much different. Elway's career, 4 or 5 rings. Marino, at least probably 1 ring in his career with Ron Meyer as his head coach. Peyton Manning doesn't go to Denver and finish his career. He finishes his career in Tennessee, maybe bringing a Super Bowl to Nashville. But as you can see, this would have a tremendous effect on sports history. Thanks for listening, guys. If you want, subscribe, comment, tell us what we did wrong there. Tell us if you disagree. Support the channel. Have a good one.